Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health.
Join us as we have fun making the weird shit a normal part of your everyday life.
Hello, and welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. This week, we are speaking with Carrie Kenner. Carrie is a writer, retired birth doula trainer, and business coach for doulas. She has trained over 2,500 birth doulas and writes and speaks about the benefit of doulas in all of life's challenging situations. Carrie advocates that doulas can bridge the gap between institution-centered care and the person-focused emotional and spiritual support humans need. In her courses and programs, Carrie shares her vast knowledge of the doula role, why doulas are so effective at preventing trauma and improving outcomes, and how doulas address racial and social justice with their work. Carrie has doulaed people through birth, death, postpartum, brain tumor diagnosis, infertility, miscarriage, and surgeries. Her book, So You Want to Be a Doula, features over 20 doula roles and tools to help aspiring doulas choose the best role for their interests and lifestyles. Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project, Carrie. So nice to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Carrie. I would love to just start with a basic definition of what is a doula.
Doula is a trained professional who provides emotional and physical and informational support to people. The traditional role of a doula, I think most people know of as a birth doula. And so a birth doula would help people prepare for their birth prenatally through in-person visits, would then support them and attend them in labor, providing physical support, emotional support, helping them understand what's going on, if there's decisions to be made, and then support them in the immediate and first few weeks postpartum. So if we take that role and extrapolate it to different things like death or postpartum or divorce, again, they're doing that role of helping people provide information so they know about what to expect and how to gather resources and make decisions, figure out what they want, what's meaningful to them, and then support them through some of the actual things that happen during the process of birth, death, postpartum divorce, etc., and then follow up with them to help them to integrate that experience.
What first inspired you to become a doula?
Let's see, how do I want to start with that? I'll start with this. I got pregnant when I was 18, and don't worry, it wasn't a crisis. I wanted to become a mother for a long time. And I also knew that I wanted to have my babies at home with a midwife. And this was pretty unusual. This was in the 1970s. Home birth wasn't popular, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. So my little 18-year-old self started looking in the phone book. We didn't have the internet then to find midwives. I ended up finding midwives that would do a home birth. At my birth, 5 midwives came. Now, there was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't high-risk case. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been at home. But at that time, midwives were being licensed in the state where I lived. And they would go to all the births to meet their requirements for licensure to have attended a certain number of births. And what really struck me after I'd given birth was, oh my God, that was tremendous. The exquisite support that I received and the transformation that I experienced from giving birth and being so empowered, those things stick with me today. And I wanted to provide that same empowerment for others, that same exquisite support. So I thought I wanted to be a midwife, but now here I am, an 18-year-old with a baby. And then within 2 years, I had my second child. And then I was a single mom. So I ended up putting myself through college to become a doctor because then I thought I could do whatever I wanted because midwifery school wasn't covered by financial aid in that time. And it just wasn't feasible. So fast forward 20 years after my first child was born and I'm pregnant with my third son. And I was going to prenatal yoga classes and somebody asked me, are you going to have a doula at your birth? And I'm like, what's a doula? And they described the doula role. And it's, wait, I've been doing that for friends and family as a way to put my hands in the experience of providing support to folks during birth. So I had been to a dozen births and I had trained to be a childbirth educator. So when I heard this role, I was like, wait a second, I've been doing that and people get paid for that? Within a week, I got laid off from the company I'd been with for almost 20 years and the light bulb went. So I'm gonna become a doula, start a business as a doula. So that's how I began. And again, at that time, it was really just birth or postpartum doulas. And that's how I began.
So, Carrie, a lot of the things you were talking about, education and obviously like a lot of emotional support, how would you say a doula's role would be different than one of another healthcare provider? As you mentioned, there were midwives in your birth, or even different from working with a therapist or a counselor in going through a lot of the emotional support that's necessary?
Great question. So one of the really important things is that doulas in the health in any healthcare environment, they're not serving as a clinician. They may have a clinical background, but they're not in a clinical role at the time that they're serving as a doula. Now there are midwives who act as doulas, there's nurses who serve as doulas, and in any of the roles that I talk about, the doula is not in that primary relationship either. Let's say, for example, in the situation of a divorce, the doula isn't an attorney. They're not leading those kinds of activities. They're not providing that level of professional support. And one of the questions I often get asked is, how do doulas and coaches differ? And I think it's similar to like therapists or counselors. Therapists, counselors, coaches, they are typically working with folks over a longer period of time, and they're looking at their life from the context of goals and strategies and how to get there. Whereas doulas are typically working on a specific event that doulas recognize as a transformational experience. So let's say, for example, business coaches aren't working with something that has a true emotional component. Yes, we care about our work and those kinds of things, but they're not working with a specific life event that's going to have either a physically challenging component or emotionally challenging component in a relatively condensed period of time. So doulas are focusing on those types of events that are happening in people's lives to prepare them for a specific event, to help them get through that event, and then to process the experience afterwards. Therapists work on longer term situations with folks usually, and some of the things that they do might overlap. So they might be doing a lot of asking people questions to help them really look inward and discover what's important to them and why those things are meaningful. And sometimes like going to past experiences and talking about what they learned from those and applying them to new situations. So similar to consultants or coaches. And one of the things that is important to differentiate is that, let's take a medical example, is if somebody does have a clinical background, they're not giving clinical advice. They may know a lot about what's going on. They may be able to interpret a lot of the medical things that are happening to the layperson, which can be extremely helpful. Doulas learn a lot of that in their role, with whatever field they're working in. They're going to learn about that field, even though they're not a practicing clinician, for example. So doulas are recognizing the emotional experience and helping people to go through that while having to also navigate clinical things and medical jargon and physical pain, perhaps. So the doula is holding space for all of those things and guiding a person through it. Did that answer your question enough?
Oh, yeah, completely.
Sorry. I hear my dog in the background. I hope you can't hear her as well.
You get to
She's she's barking quite a bit and greeting the neighbors walking down the street. So when you think about a situation that you've had with somebody that you have worked with as a doula, can you share an experience where you were able to help bridge the gap between what was, we'll go with a medical situation, how they were going through that and how they were navigating that system and trying to minimize the amount of trauma that can be associated, especially with a particularly big or scary diagnosis?
So I'll talk about the person that I supported through a brain tumor diagnosis. And they called me, this is a person that I knew previously, with an advertising that I was a brain tumor diagnosis doula. And they let me know that they had just been diagnosed and that they were very concerned. And one of the things that I've learned over the years of being a doula is then talking to just people in my community. They would tell me about experiences, and I would think to myself, wow, if I had a doula, that could have probably been a much better experience. And so this person that was telling me about this diagnosis that they just received, I said, would it be helpful for you if I went to your doctor's appointments and just sat there? I'll talk with you ahead of time to find out, like, what's the kind of things, information you need to know? What are you concerned about? What questions do you have? And then help you to ask follow-up questions, because we all know that when we are facing a scary diagnosis and we have a finite visit with a care provider, we often get really nervous and our brains don't work, just the physiology of how thinking works and the emotional system. So I said, would that be helpful for me to be there with you? And she goes, oh my gosh, yes. So we met before. She told me about what her concerns were, which ironically, one of them was her getting her hair shaved. She's very cared about her appearance. So the thing is, a doula, we don't care what our client wants or what's important to them. We just help them get what's important to them, whether it was the same thing that we would choose or something we agreed with or not. So our ability to be non-judgmental and compassionate is the hallmark of the doula roles. This person was very concerned about her hair being shaved, and she was single. So what recovery was going to be like, and what the risks were. And she told me all her list of concerns. And then I just went to the appointment with her, and she just introduced me as this is a person here that's going to support me. This is my friend. And yeah, she got really nervous. And I said, well, remember you were interested in this. Do you want to ask the doctor about it? So we're not taking over we're really lifting the person up from behind or from below and saying, hey, remember this thing that was important to you. Do you want to ask more about that? And the thing is, sometimes when I've been with people and I've asked them that question, they've been like, no, actually, I'm not worried about that now because I just got this other information, which quieted that concern. So she got her questions answered. We got information. And then we took that information afterwards and made a plan for her recovery. How long was she going to be in the hospital? What was she probably likely going to need afterwards? And yeah, so she was able to then contact her family and support community and get people to be there for her. So we developed, very much like a birth plan, we developed a surgery plan. And I went to the hospital when she was having her surgery. So I was there holding her hand in the waiting room because she was very nervous. They came out and I sat with her family and I informed her family about what to expect and these kind of things. So doulas will often work with people's chosen support community. And then I was there with her after the surgery, and she was having a really difficult time post-surgery with nausea and dizziness. And so I sat there and I was with her in her hospital room and helped her get information on what kind of medications they could use to calm that down and so she could eat. And then I checked within with her for the next few days after the surgery and until she went home. And then I actually ended up going to her house because she was having a really hard time in recovery. And I did some energy work with her and just showed her family some things they could do to help calm her nervous system. So that is what kind of that experience would look like.
That's pretty cool example. Really took us from the beginning through the end. With all of these different experiences that you've had with people over the course of your career, is there any one thing that really changed your perspective on this work, or did it just deepen your feelings about being a doula?
Real huge things that changed my perspective on pretty much life and humans. One is I went in, so people often become a birth doula to help prevent other people from having the bad experience that they had. And I came into it from a very different place. I wanted to help people have the same amazing experience that I had. And because we are humans with our opinions, I thought that meant that people should have unmedicated home births. Like I had an opinion, at least that's what I chose for myself. And what I found is that if I thought somebody else should have a home birth and they didn't want, that would be awful. Just like when people, yeah, whatever kind of birth people want, I want to help them have that kind of birth because there's a whole thing behind what got them to the decisions that they want about their birth. Some of them are subconscious, some of them are cultural overlays. There's all different reasons, but I help people unpack that so they are really clear about what they want. And then I know exactly what my job is. My job is to try to help them get that experience as closely as possible with all the incredible unknowns and uncertainty of the birth process. So what I learned was just this incredible ability to be non-judgmental, to have absolute compassion for whatever people wanted, no matter how much I wouldn't want that kind of birth. I wanted them to have what they wanted, just like I want, like we all want to have what we want, right? So that was the first thing I learned. The second thing I learned was to shut up. So many people think that our jobs are to inform people and transmit everything we've learned in our lives to somebody else, and that's going to make them better or do better or be more equipped or whatever. And that's just not how humans work, and I know that you two know that a lot. And so when I found out that by asking people open-ended questions and being quiet and letting the answer percolate and give them time to contemplate and then think about and then share things, that not only would I learn what I was hoping to understand about them, but they would have a deepened understanding about themselves. And it was, I remember as a new doula and kind of being trained to do this, I would ask a question and I would literally count in my mind to 10 before saying anything, because that's often how long it takes people to like really think and decide if you're safe and do they want, how vulnerable do they want to be and those kind of things. And but I just learned, Don't say anything." I wanted to break the silence because we're a culture that's so uncomfortable with silence. But I found that if I waited, they would finally say something. Like at the 9-second mark, they would start talking and they would say things and they'd often say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even really know I felt that way until I just thought about that now." So there'd be this incredible like awakening and understanding, and it would create incredible trust in our relationship in a really short period of time. Because we would have basically two-hour visits before I would join them in labor, one of the most vulnerable and challenging times of people's lives. And they would trust me incredibly just from the time we spent in those two-hour visits because of this capacity to listen and to hold what they wanted with my heart.
So, Carrie, what I found fascinating when you were talking is that you gave this great example of how someone had a lot of family support and you were still there as the doula. And it really just made me think about what you said is that you're there to be non judgmental. I could see a lot of people choosing to work with a doula during any sort of transformational time for that emotional support, primarily because they need someone there by them that is not going to pass their own opinions or their own judgment of what they should do or what they want them to do. Because let's face it, we're all very intertwined, especially in our own family dynamics. And it's hard. It is hard for us not to give our opinions to our own family because when something's happening to someone you care about and that you love, it's affecting you. So I'm just curious, what do you see as a primary driver for people coming to doulas? Is that needing that space for non-judgment, or have you seen other layers of that?
Yeah. Again, it's depending on what the event is that they're getting ready to face. So people in for birth would come usually for one of three reasons. They wanted the doula to help them navigate something they were really scared or nervous, or there was just so much uncertainty. They were like, "You've done this before. You know the ropes. Help us figure out how to get through this." Then there was people who wanted the doula to prevent things from happening, particularly if they'd had a prior experience that wasn't what they wanted, that they maybe even had trauma from. So they would also often be like, "I need you to act like almost like a bodyguard." And it's like, "We can't do that. But what we can do is figure out what are the things that would really help you either stand up for yourself or find a care provider that you feel really aligned with, or help you figure out what to do differently the next time and to really just support you in that moment. But others would actually come because they needed help negotiating family. I had people hire me because they wanted me to help with mother-in-laws that didn't like each other, mother-in-laws that wanted to be there, sisters who had very different ideas from what they wanted and were like harping at them to do what they wanted, those kinds of things. And those were actually some of my absolute favorites. I love working with families. I love getting people to just all see themselves and see what the dynamics are at play. So those would be some of my favorite situations to work with.
Can you talk about some of the differences between different types of doulas?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned as a doula trainer is that basically 1 out of 10 of the people I trained actually went on to practice as a birth doula. And it wasn't because I was a crappy trainer. In fact, people just raved about my trainings. And nobody ever said, oh, I wish I wouldn't have taken it. It was a waste of time or money. They're like, I've learned things that I'm going to use the rest of my life, but I can't be on call. I can't leave to go to a birth and not come home for 2 days. I have young kids at home, or I have other things in life. There was a lifestyle thing that prevented them from working as a doula, and it broke my heart. I would try to help people understand before they'd sign up for the training. So, this is about birth and you're going to be on call. Be like, yeah. They think they just don't get it because they don't want to, because they really want to do this. But when the reality sinks in, they're like, I can't be on call. What am I talking about? So that's why I created this book, is because I've been doing all this research into all the different types of doulas. And I want people to figure out before they spend the money on a doula training, what kind of doula would you be interested in being, and what can you actually do with your lifestyle? So one of the things that I outline is these are for this role, do you need to be on call or not? Can you do this work from home? Do you have to go somewhere? The places that you have to go, like a hospital or a courtroom or a penitentiary, are you comfortable being in those places, or can you get comfortable being in those places? Here's the type of professionals you'll be working with: doctors, nurses, midwives, lawyers, prison guards, judges. Can you imagine yourself working with these people? So I help people figure out like what their interests are, and then what the requirements of the job are. Are you going to be going to places physically with people, or are you going to be doing your work in one-on-one meetings, or do you have to be in person, or can you do this virtually? So really helping people to see all the different aspects of a role to figure out what they can do and what's going to work for them. It could also be things like how much time, like surgery is scheduled, but it could also be 8 hours. Are you physically, mentally, do you have dietary needs, medication needs? Can you access those things if you have to be somewhere away from home for 8 hours? And what's the length of the relationship? So there's menopause doulas, and they might be working for somebody for years as they're navigating perimenopause. And then there's people who are working with somebody around a miscarriage, which is a very short period of time. So all those different aspects are what I'm trying to help people understand about the various doula roles. But they all involve that knowing about the field so that you can provide that informational support, recognizing the event as having this transformational and emotional spiritual component, and being able to have that non-judgmental, compassionate position, and to then provide that physical in-person support if the situation necessitates that.
Carrie, with such a vast array of different types of doulas out there, how does one go about becoming a doula? What type of training and experience is necessary for that?
Yeah, and it varies again depending on the role. So there's some doula roles that don't really have an official training program. Divorce doula would be a good example. And I think those are actually coming about now because there's more interest. It's usually interest, or need follows interest. So as people get more interested in, oh, I had a really hard time through my divorce. I'd really like to be able to help people navigate this better. I'd like to become a divorce doula. They may find trainings starting to pop up. But in the history, even of birth doulas, it was just like, this is what people did. And then they formalized it. And then from their formalization, they're like, oh, I could help other people do this and create a training. Yeah, because being a doula is really, it's old grassroots, what we've always done as human beings in supporting people. Birth doulas, death doulas, postpartum doulas, what's called full spectrum doulas, which is helping people through all aspects of the reproductive years. So it could be from abortion, miscarriage, surrogacy, adoption, postpartum, kind of that whole loss, the whole sphere and possibilities around reproduction. There are trainings, formal trainings for those, and simply just go to the internet and look those up and people can find them. There's a lot of variation in terms of things that are offered in person versus things that are offered online, things that are completely self-study or things that are cohort-based. So many different variations, and prices also can vary from a few $100s to a few $1,000s or more. I encourage people to really also think about, how do you learn? What kind of training is going to be conducive to you to finish? And will it be comprehensive enough to help you not only know how to serve clients, but also to start a business, because most doulas are working independently. And then for the doula roles that there is not a lot of education, I offer a doula training that is for any kind of doula, because it's teaching the core doula skills that can be applied to any situation. For people who are already well-versed in that field, say, for example, somebody who's gone through a divorce, or somebody who works in dementia care, or somebody who is working with psychedelic therapy, for example, they can take what they already know about that field and just overlay the doula skill on top of it. For people who are interested in doing those things but don't have experience in that field, they're going to have to find ways to get experience in that field. And that could be finding a mentor who already works there that can tell them all about the industry, or working as a clerk in a divorce court, things like that. There's different ways that people can gain that firsthand experience and then combine it with the doula skills.
Can you share with us some of the basic doula skills, just a couple that cross over different roles?
Yeah. So the core one, it's communication skills, and it's learning how to ask really important open-ended questions. There's kind of some specific questions that are at the core of the questions, but how to listen, how to do what's the active listening, where we're paraphrasing, we're helping people to hear themselves and come to their own kind of conclusions, and then helping people to formulate their wishes and desires and plans based on what they're coming up with, helping people to do some kind of excavation and unpacking of things. The other is knowing how to recognize things as a transformational experience. So following along the lines of the heroic journey, that the mythological story arc, helping people to understand that right now, when you're facing something, you're in the place of the unknown. And then there's some time that you're going to have to do things that are really hard and challenging, and what's going to help you to get through those. And then what are some things that you might have to do that you never considered yourself having to do before, like shaving your head? And then what are things then that you're going to learn from, that you might learn? And then afterwards, what have you learned? And helping people integrate that. So it really is a whole process. So that's another aspect of the doula role. And then a big part is the use of energy. Like, we're holding space for a lot of stuff. And we're also we learn the skills of observation and how to really read a room and to know how to advocate. So what does advocacy look like versus what does taking over look like? So in the room kind of experiences, and helping people learn advocacy skills. And then I do believe that there is a way to learn to be non-judgmental and to learn compassion. And it's something that I'm constantly stretching. It's like exercising a muscle, and just learning how to do that. There's a lot of self-inquiry that's a part of that process. Other things are simply how to market yourself as a doula, how to get word out there, how to find clients, how to interview, and then how to manage clients. So it's for people who are therapists or coaches and they have an independent business, that's going to come easily. But for people who are coming from work where they've been hired and they're an employee of a company, this is new. And it's a crucial part because most people don't say, "Oh, I want to be a doula because I want to start my own business." They're like, "I want to be a doula because I want to help people in this way." And then they find out that they have to know how to do a little bit of marketing and business management to be able to have their career as a doula. So those are some of the key things that I think are essential in for every doula to know.
What do you think was the most, I was going to say, obscure doula role that you may have come across of that you were like, ooh, I didn't realize someone could be a doula doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the ones that I think is really interesting because I think the audience also the potential clients aren't so interested in it is menarche, so the onset of menstruation. So if you think about what young people who are going to be menstruating might need, that there's I think it's certainly better now than when I was a young woman, but there's so much unknown, so much misinformation. It's a huge rite of passage that is usually ignored or not even recognized or considered. The role of working with a young person as they're getting close to that point in their life, or it's just happened, and helping them to integrate the experience and put it into just a bigger, meaningful context. That was one of the most interesting ones for me.
Being through so many intense situations with clients, how have you been able to personally maintain your own energy and well-being?
Thank you for asking that because I was realizing, oh, that's one of the other core skills that should be in a doula training is self-care, boundaries, avoiding secondary trauma. So I think, again, I think so much of it comes to recognize these experiences as as transformational. And when you are able to see that larger context, the minutia of what happens in that context, it's both less potentially traumatic. We expect there to be challenge, so we're prepared for it. We can welcome it and embrace it and move through it and process it afterwards. We also know that it's not ours. So one of the things that when I was training doulas, they would often say, "But isn't my job to protect them from bad things happening to them, from people wanting to do things to them that they don't want?" And I said, "It's not your job to protect, it's your job to help them identify the things that they want to avoid and to help them recognize that these things might need to happen and what are those situations, and to help them notice that those things are being talked about. It may be when they're in the middle of labor, and how do they want to deal with that now? Do they still want to avoid it? Are they ready to embrace it?" I would recognize that this is their path to follow. It is not mine to change the path. It's mine to accompany them, walk alongside them, be a guide at different places. There's times where I'd say, "Okay, when you get to this part in labor, some things can be a little bit tricky. So here's some things that might be helpful." Or when you get to your 40th week of pregnancy or 39th or 38th, depending on who your care provider is, they might want to start talking about induction. Be prepared for that, and we can talk about it at that time. But I have to let go of what I think they should or shouldn't do. And I've been around hundreds and hundreds of births. I had definitely some ideas about, and I still do, about what's happening in maternity care. But it is not, when I'm working with that client, it is not mine to fix. When I'm outside being an advocate or working on legislation or those kind of things, it's when I'm the advocate for birth practices in the United States, but not with the individual client. I developed a self-care routine that after a birth, this is how I would release any energy. It might be emotional energy, it might be physical energy. And I would encourage and teach my students how to develop a post whatever routine that helps them clear that energy. I also got weekly body care, massage, chiropractic, acupuncture. I just rotated things every week. I was getting something like that. And you've got to have a doula buddy. So somebody who works in your industry, works as a doula, understands what it's like that you can debrief with. And I even teach like some rules around debriefing so that you're asking for permission, you're asking for what you're needing, and your partner, on the receiving end, knows how to honor those things so that we're not getting sloppy and messy with our energy and emotions on top of each other because we're all dealing with those same things. So having some very specific self-care practices, understanding trauma, understanding secondary trauma, all those things are really important for doulas to do this work.
Do you find that your students are receptive to that, or do you think that they dismiss it at first and then realize that they need those practices?
I don't think anybody dismisses it just because of the world we live in now. I think most people are aware of, they have some basic understanding of trauma, for example. So I don't have to say, if you're witnessing things, we all basically as humans had experiences like that. What I do think happens is that most people don't start off attending 4 births a month, or like they have a lot of clients, so they may not feel that need. They may not have challenging experiences out of the gate, but when they do, they get it. And in the birth doula training, I talked a lot about the statistics and what happens in labor and how most people deal with it. They got a pretty good sense that this isn't a walk in the park. And while birth is beautiful and seeing a baby come into the world is amazing and watching families be born is incredible, like people get all that good stuff, but they didn't walk away thinking it's going to be all rainbows and unicorns. And they knew there was going to be challenging things that they would be witnessing. So they were prepared for that.
Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today and teaching us all about the role of the doula, the importance of the doula. Can you share with us where people can find you and get to know more about you and your work with doulas?
So I have a website and it's doula-training.carriekenner.com. And there you will be able to find my book, learn about my doula trainings, and see what I'm doing about doula advocacy in the world.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure that we link your website into our show notes. Can people also purchase your book on Amazon? And do you have any type of social media that we can add to that list?
I don't do social media. That's part of my self-care.
Okay.
But my book is on Amazon. So you want to be a doula.
Okay, great.
And it's both available in print and as an ebook.
Nice. Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure all of that is linked in our show notes.
Great. So one other thing that I wanted to add, because of the nature of your podcast and that you talk so much about alternative medicine and approaches to things, and I'm assuming that's a big part of why your audience loves you, because it's one of the things I love about listening to you. And that is that because doulas aren't the clinical expert or the legal expert or the expert, like I don't know if I want to use the word generalists, but we know a lot about what's out there. And so doulas, like if somebody's struggling with a certain thing, they're not going to say, oh, take this medicine, because that's not their role. They're going to say there might be a medication, there could be acupuncture, there could be energy work, you might need Reiki. They're really open to whatever people might need. It's again part of that non-judgmental myth, and just this vast awareness of all different modalities that people might need to access, that I think is also another hallmark of the doula role. And I don't know if that can be woven in there in some way.
I think so. Yeah, I was curious about that. If people, when they hire a doula, are they also looking for some complementary therapies to go along with it, especially if they're going through a medical diagnosis or treatment, that some doulas would want to obtain additional training or just at least learn more about quote unquote alternative or holistic therapies that are out there?
I've had clients that have run the gamut from not interested in anything than going to the hospital and using their doctor and than and using medications for things, but also people who specifically are looking for a doula because it's considered a complementary service or not the primary thing. But I think just that what I learned is that my clients had all these different experiences. So they would tell me about that. And I think this is particularly for people who are working in like cancer, illness, dementia, end of life, is that you're working with clients that are having lots of different experiences. And they're telling you about this therapy or this new drug that their doctor told them about, or this research that's happening. And it's just this massive cross fertilization from what you know about the industry or the field to what your clients are telling you about to what your particular interests are. Because doulas, we always want to know as many things to offer to our clients as potential things that might be helpful to them. But we also have the freedom of we're never in a position to prescribe, to recommend, to even would barely suggest. The only thing I would suggest is I'd suggest you think about this. I suggest you look into some things that might be useful to you. It makes our jobs, I think, so profound because we can be so useful to people that we're the ones who have done the research or gone to the conferences and amassed lots of different ideas that we can share with people, and they don't have to get stressed out trying to do that on their own.
It's amazing work. And I think that what you do and how you train others to work in these different fields is pretty awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been the most rewarding thing I've done in my life. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, the two of you, for what you do. It's really magnificent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that you took a listen as well.
That was a pretty cool conversation.
I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I remembered hearing about one of the other girls in nursing school say that she was a doula. Most recently, I really haven't even heard the word mentioned again until the last couple of years, knowing some people that went to become death doulas.
Yeah.
And I don't think I realized, I guess I realized at first it was just for these specific time points in life, not really realizing the depth of being a doula is really this emotional support for any of these major life transitions. Something as exciting as menarche, like she mentioned, or obviously something, less than exciting, like going through surgery and a cancer diagnosis.
Think about all of these different major milestones that people go through and where they depend on their families and how families can try to insert so much into that
Yes.
experience that it becomes even more stressful. So it's
Well,
exciting to think about more roles in that support.
and I totally can see, obviously, in our roles of being a nurse for so long, I've witnessed families that were very much putting their wishes above what maybe the patient was wanting. I also can totally see as being on the other side, me imposing my desires onto my own family members over what I'd like them to be doing in certain situations, especially if it's a situation that you've had your own experience in. So I can really see how doulas can be just so supportive, like knowing that you have someone in your corner to support you through the whole entire process and whatever that is.
Yeah, because people may want or not want certain things that the majority actually want the opposite.
Oh,
And
yeah.
how hard that can be to navigate speaking up on your own behalf when it may not be mainstream or what's considered normal when you're navigating different areas of your life.
What I thought was really the big differentiator between therapists, coaches, and I would even argue nurses and doulas is that the doulas look like they're very boots on the ground. They are that constant throughout the many different stages of a transformation that you're going through. And just thinking about it from even a surgery experience, what the people you talk to who interact with before surgery and making the decision to have a surgery, during the surgery, and then even after, you're meeting so many different people just through that process. And you can imagine having someone who's literally physically there when you're out of the hospital to help you prepare for everything. Then when you're in the hospital, being your support during that whole point. And you could probably say the same for the not midwifery, but someone being there during the pregnancy and giving birth. I think that was one of the things that I think is really different because you can make all these plans beforehand for any of these things that you want. But then a lot of times when you get in the situation, things change. And so then who's there with you to help you navigate changing when you thought you wanted all these things that may or may not come to fruition?
I think about that especially around birth doulas because so many people come up with birth plans and then the
Yeah.
plan just goes out the window, and how to capture the heart of what that person really wants and navigating, when things go sideways or go differently, how they can still have some sense of what their wishes were and how that can actually prevent so much medical trauma.
Yeah. I can totally see that 100%.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that was most pointed is too is that all these transitions and life transitions that the doulas are there for, they're being called in because you're never really doing these transitions alone. You're doing these transitions, you're the primary person going through them, but you have all these people on the outskirts. And really, you're looking for that doula to be there and be that person by your side to help you navigate through all this.
Yeah. I wonder how those dynamics are when there are family members that want to be that support person
But
that
they
but here comes this external person
Yeah.
that comes into play. I imagine that could be pretty spicy sometimes.
Oh, sure. Because I think she even mentioned this, that sometimes doulas get called in because of you have these family members who are impressing what they want and they desire. And it's like, I need someone to help me state what I desire, especially when I'm not able to, or I'm
Right.
at my wit's end and I'm tired and I'm exhausted and I'm ready just to give in because I just don't want to deal with this anymore. I do see how nurses could be very good doulas, just not just the fact that a lot of the doulas have this medical experience in the medical realm, or some of the doulas do, but just also from having the ability and having to be with people during these difficult transitions and during sometimes of making the hard decisions and trying to figure out what the best plan is, having those plans change. I think it'd be nice moving from being in that role in an episodic way to more of a time spanned portion of it.
Oh, for sure. I can think of many situations over the years with patients where I definitely had an opinion about
Oh, yes.
what was going on with them and how I felt like they should be navigating different things, but also being open to meeting the patient where they're at and realizing this is not my journey, this is their journey, and advocating for them, especially when they became unable to speak on their own.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely there's certain aspects of being a doula that nurses have to do within their practice as well.
Yeah. Sounds like a cool, exciting role to dive into. And I'm interested to see what other types of doulas there are out there.
Yeah. Maybe somebody listening to our episode today will be sparked into reaching out to Carrie and get into one of her trainings. Would love to hear from our audience if anybody does reach out and explores that. Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend.
Want to learn more about a specific topic? Follow and drop us a line on Instagram so we can explore it more with you.